Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, if last week was all about tanks, this week it's fighter jets. What are the new requests from the Ukrainian government as they try to fight Russia in this war?
So as you said, when we sat here last week, the big talk of the town was tanks. It was President Biden sort of, forging through a stalemate with European allies in agreeing to provide tanks to Ukraine. Within 24 hours of President Biden's announcement, we saw Ukrainian officials already start to reiterate some of their previous requests, specifically in the form of long-range missiles, as well as fighter jets. And so the administration has been hesitant to provide both of them. We've heard administration officials reiterate this week that there are no imminent plans to do so. We heard President Biden, flat out say no when asked if the U.S. would be providing F-16s. Even though we heard President Biden say that, we do know he does plan on speaking with President Zelensky again in the near future. We know this is now, Ukraine's number one request. And we've also seen throughout, the course of the war, we've seen President Biden change his mind on some of the most important requests from the Ukrainians, whether that was the Patriot missile defense system or the tanks, as we mentioned. There has been, repeated precedent of President Biden saying no to a weapon system and then changing his mind once, the calculation on the ground has changed.
Yeah, we don't know this yet, but there are even rumors that that might be the case with long-range missiles as well in the next aid package.
Absolutely. We've heard, so there's been some reporting out there that long-range fires could be included. This has really been a request of Ukraine for now almost the entirety of the war. It's almost a year now since Russia invaded last February. And one of the reasons the U.S. has been so hesitant to provide them with long-range fires is the U.S. really has not been interested in providing Ukraine with weapons that would allow Ukraine to hit targets in Russian territory. And so that's been the overarching red line that we've seen is, we're not going to give you weapons that you could use to hit Russian targets inside Russian territory. Now, there has been some reporting that could change, and we heard from a White House spokesperson earlier this week that a new aid package will be announced soon. And so it'll be interesting to see if these long-range fires are in it, or if President Biden declines once again to provide them.
So the big word we keep hearing in terms of what's going on in Ukraine is escalation. There's a lot of concern about what Russia is going to do for its next offensive. What are we hearing?
That's a great point. We've heard it throughout the Biden administration over the course of the war. We've heard every time they provide a new weapon system, there is, the question of escalation is always paramount in their minds. We've also heard the Pentagon, kind of flatly disregard claims from Kremlin officials of escalation, considering they invaded Ukraine themselves and they could choose to end the war whenever they want by pulling their troops out of Ukraine. Moving forward, however, we have heard from experts that it does look like Russia will launch a new offensive as it gets warmer. We also know that Ukraine is looking to do similar and liberate some territory that Russia currently occupies in Ukraine. And so whether it's the tanks that the U.S. has provided, whether or not they provide the F-16s, all of these new weapon systems going to Ukraine impact how Russia will view it and will impact how these two counteroffensive will play out in the coming months.
So there's been a lot of talk now that Republicans control the House about what's going to happen with defense spending. There's obviously this big showdown over the debt ceiling. Congressional Republicans are seeking spending cuts in exchange for raising the debt limit. They seem to be willing to look in places Republicans have traditionally not been willing to look for spending cuts. You've talked to a very influential member of Congress, a leader of an important conservative faction in the House. What did he have to say about the status of defense spending?
So Congressman Perry, who's the leader of the House Freedom Caucus, the far-right conservative group that held up Speaker McCarthy's nomination in the beginning, he said he wants to go essentially through program by program for DoD, figure out what is necessary and what isn't. Essentially, in his opinion, he wants to root out things that don't relate entirely to defense. He specifically mentioned, energy, climate change initiatives like the Green New Deal. He also mentioned what he described as woke policies. And so we've heard a number of lawmakers say they're not interested in defense cuts, but we've also heard a number of them say that they were specifically interested in these, woke programs. And so that has seemed to be the overarching target of these supposed cuts. And so it'll be interesting to see if the the factions within the party that don't support budget cuts would support these cuts if it meant giving funding to other places.
So, I mean, there's also a subset of Republicans, I think a smaller one, but still significant, who don't want to continue aiding Ukraine, or at least don't want to continue doing it at its current level. What did the congressman have to say about that? Obviously, some of these members, even if they may be small in number, are pretty important given the size of the Republicans' House majority.
Absolutely. So as we know, the Republicans hold a very slim majority. So all it takes is a couple members to really create a thorn in their side. And so Congressman Perry has supported, helping Ukraine, but specifically, he has a couple issues with the way that support has gone down. Is essentially the way he was putting it. Specifically, he doesn't think Ukraine should be getting weapons right off conveyor belts, right off the production line.
Right.
When President Biden provides aid to Ukraine, he does it in one of two ways. One, he either takes it from existing stockpiles, or he essentially says the U.S. is going to procure these from these, defense companies. And so Congressman Perry says he doesn't believe the U.S. should be giving these weapons right off the production line to Ukraine. They should be going to U.S. troops. Now, so to get back to your question, he is supportive of continuing to provide aid to Ukraine. He said as long as there is, rigorous oversight, and he expects more of it. So there are some, aspects of his support that, could waft, and his opinion could change. So there is a part of the House Freedom Caucus that doesn't support, or they've come out already and said they don't want to keep aiding Ukraine to the extent they have.
Right.
To be fair, Congress has already passed $113 billion of aid to Ukraine in the past year. So they have provided significant amounts of money. There's a small faction that say they don't want to. Given the small majority Republicans have, they could really pose an issue to Kevin McCarthy and the party at large as they move forward with the, next year's NDAA or any future legislation.
And finally, there are some Republicans who are willing to look in the Pentagon budget for things to cut, but aren't necessarily interested in a lower top line defense budget number.
Exactly. And so there are a number of House Republicans who, are very concerned about, say, depleted U.S. stockpiles,
Right.
the threat from China as we move forward into the coming years, and their continued aggression as it relates toward Taiwan. So there are a number of officials who don't necessarily agree with exactly what the Pentagon is spending its money on, but believe that they need to refine it, refocus it, and maybe even commit more money to very specific challenges that these legislators see.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.